Hello, everybody. Welcome to Ad America. My name is Aninda, one of the EGATs here in Ad America, and we welcome our audience joining us on this event today. Ad America is the U.S. Embassy's American Center, and our mission is to provide a space for young donations to learn more about the United States. On this event, we'll be continuing our series of intensive academic writing, Master the Basics with top professors. In the meantime, how about we spice things up a little bit with a trivia? The question for today is, the following are all components of a research paper except, is it A, abstract, B, a research plan, C, discussion, or D, twist? Take a guess and let us know your answer on our social media because in the end of the event, we'll do a live shout out for those of you who can guess the answer correctly. Other than that, don't forget to take a selfie and tag at America's Instagram account. Without further ado, please welcome our facilitator for today, Linda Grove, a consulting director of Social Science Research Council, and our co-facilitator, Dr. Harni Kartikaningsi, a lecturer at University of Indonesia. To Bu Linda and Dr. Harni, time is yours.
Thank you. It's good to be with you today, and I look forward to talking and hearing the discussion and hearing your questions.
Hello, good afternoon all. Thank you. I think we can just start with what Dr. Linda Grove will present today.
Okay, so I shall share the screen and see if we can make this go. So what we're going to talk about today is publishing. So after you've done all the work of finally writing your paper, then you want to get it published. And so we're going to talk about publishing. I should probably just say a little bit about myself to start with. I'm an American academic. I live in Japan. I study China. And I'm now retired and I work for the Social Science Research Council, which is one of America's largest academic organizations that brings together people in the social sciences, provides fellowships and other kinds of programs. It will celebrate its 100th anniversary very soon. So let's go on. So this is where we're going to go, sort of why publish, how to select a journal, how to submit a manuscript, and what happens after you submit it and what is called the peer review process. So the question is, why do we publish? People all over the world publish a lot. I went and checked the sort of latest statistics, and the guess is that there are something like 30,000 journals being published in various parts of the world in various languages, and maybe 2 million articles a year published. Some people think it's too much, but anyway, there's an awful lot of publishing going on. I think as an academic, as somebody who's writing and doing research, we publish for a couple of reasons, and I'll leave the practical consideration second and talk first about the more idealistic reasons why we publish. We get interested in academia and in writing because of problems we want to research and solve. We have questions we want to answer. And we go out and we do research. And then when we find the answers, you want to share those with somebody else. And we want to share them with people who basically are interested in similar kinds of questions. Academic discourse, academic discussion is really like an ongoing conversation. So somebody writes something, has a question, writes something, publishes something, and other people see that and it gives them ideas, and they maybe write something that disagrees with it or comments on it or develops it in a new way or applies the ideas to some other country or some other situation. And then somebody else comes along and does it. So it's an ongoing conversation. And it's the way we communicate with people. It's very handy because we can communicate with people, not only those we see on a day-to-day basis in our own country or in our own university or in our own neighborhood, but we can also communicate with people all over the world. So publishing is joining that conversation, putting in our part, listening to what other people say, and then thinking again and writing more things. So that's the reason it would be nice to say we publish, and it's one of the reasons I think we publish. But there is a practical reason also for publishing, which is if you are in an academic setting and you want to have a job, find a job, keep a job, gain a promotion, you have to publish in most countries. And the regulations on publishing are becoming, at many universities, are becoming much more strict than they were a few years ago. You will be asked in many countries now, even though it's not your native language, to publish in English. And part of the reason we're doing these kinds of talks is to help people improve their skills so that they can join those international conversations, not just local conversations. So the first part of this is on selecting a journal. My assumption is that you already have already have an article, or you at least have the draft of an article. And we want to say, okay, now what do we do with that? In some cases, the article may come out of the thesis that you've written. In some cases, it may be independent. It may come out of a project you were assigned to work on. It may come out of a variety of things. This is going to be specifically, I'm going to be talking specifically about selecting a journal. Later on, if you have questions about other kinds of publishing, we can talk about them. One good way often for young scholars to get started is if you're able to join some kind of a collaborative project. The collaborative project may put out a joint publication in which the members themselves write articles on particular parts of it. And that's, in fact, is often a good way to get into publishing the first time. But this time, this is going to be about how you select a journal. The first thing you need to think about is, who do you want to talk to? Who do you want to read the article? And that's the first question you want to think about, because if you send the article off to a journal that the people you want to reach don't read, then it's not going to get to them. So the first question then is, who do you want to talk to? I've put up here something on different kinds of journals, and this is just kind of an overview of different kinds that I thought of. There are many, many more, as you can imagine. If there are tens of thousands of journals being published, they have various different approaches. I put up some of the ones that I often look at. And the first of those are kind of area studies journals. They're journals that in their titles or in their explanations of who they are basically looking at things that happen in a particular part of the world. So the ones I've put up here, and we will talk about a couple of them later on. For example, the Journal of Southeast Asian Studies, or Southeast Asian Studies, Journal of Asian Studies, International Journal of Asian Studies, Journal of Japanese Studies, Journal of Indonesian Studies, one that very clearly says that it has a target that is a specific country or a specific group of countries or a specific region. And there are hundreds of these kinds all over the world, from relatively small regions to Europe or India or Southeast Asia or Latin America, but ones that are basically area studies journals. There are also country-specific journals. And I've put up a few examples: Vietnamese studies, Japanese studies. There are any number of, for example, in my field, China studies journals. There are all kinds of American studies journals. If you're doing American studies, you can find by time period, by place in the United States, by all kinds of things. There are a third kind, which are quite common, called discipline-specific journals. Many of these are in fact put out by major academic associations. So the sociological Sociological Association has the annual review of sociology. In the US, the American Historical Association puts out the American Historical Rule Review. You have comparative political studies. I mean, there are all kinds of discipline-specific journals. I've put up only some of the very big ones here. I've been working recently on a paper or a chapter for a book that's kind of big general theme on Chinese rural communities. And all of a sudden, I discovered all kinds of agricultural journals that I'd never heard about before. For example, the Journal of Agrarian Change, or the Journal of Land Use, or the Journal of something else that I didn't know before, but turned out to have articles that I wanted to look at. And there are subject-focused journals, from big ones to little ones. So I've got here, for example, Journal of Rural Sociology, Journal of Media, Cultural and Society, Journal of Economic Behavior and Organization, International Migration Review, and on and on. I mean, I think if you took one field, if you sort of looked and said, how many journals are there in cinema studies, you would probably find 50 if you looked worldwide, maybe more than that. And if you look at economics journals, they're everything from practical economics to business to much more specific journals. The way you write the article is going to vary depending on what kind of journal you choose. So you need to think about what kind of journal, what kind of audience you want to choose. There are also practical considerations. Quite frankly, the more prestigious the journal, the higher its rejection rate, and the longer you have to you may have to wait to get your article published. Sometimes it may be a year or two. I saw an announcement not very long ago from a major journal saying, look, we've got 2 years of backlog of articles, so we're not going to take any new submissions for a little while until we do something about it. So you need to think about, the practical questions. The first one is, does the place you're working or the place have regulations on what rank of journals count for getting a promotion, for example, or for your personal or institutional reviews? I don't happen to think this is a very good idea, but many universities divide journals into what they call tiers: first tier, second tier, third tier, and they will only count for your promotion review those that come in a certain category, like first tier or second tier. If those are the rules of your organization, you need to be aware of them. Some organizations also have regulations about indexing and only count articles that appear in indexes like Scopus or other indexing services. If that's the case, then you're going to have to sort of check those things out before you decide what journal to look for, what journal you want to publish in. As I said, I don't think all the ranking systems necessarily tell us very much. Sometimes very good articles are published in places that are not so famous, but you have to figure out what the rules are where you are. So how do you find then, if you don't know the journal you want to submit to, or you don't know what the range of the journals are, how do you find the audience you want to reach? And obviously one way is to consider what art journals have published the articles in your field that you found interesting. There are lots of ways of doing this. I must confess that right now I find the fastest way, at least to get fairly recent citations, is to simply go to Google Scholar and put in the sort of big titles of things that you're interested in and see what comes up. It very handily also has links to many of them, and so it's fairly easy to find out. There are many other ways of doing it. I mean, look at your own research, look at what you've read to do the research and say, okay, if one journal comes up a couple of times, maybe you want to think that put that one on your list. After you've made a list of several potential journals, and this list may include both some from those different kinds of categories. You need to look at recent issues of each of the journals on your list and see what the journal says about itself. So I've put up here, this is kind of internal publicity. I was involved in helping to start this journal. It's called the International Journal of Asian Studies. And what I have over here on the side, we'll look at in a minute, is a blurb. It's actually published, it's edited by the Institute for Advanced Study of Asia at the University of Tokyo. And it's published by Cambridge University Press. It's been around maybe for 10 or 12 years. And you can see this is what it says about itself. And I've highlighted several things. So it says it's an interdisciplinary English language forum in the humanities and social sciences. So we've got the big thing there. It's about global Asian studies community. It looks at a regional basis, emphasizing patterns and tendencies that go beyond the borders of individual countries. So it does some stuff on individual countries, but it looks for the cross. It's if you look down at the last one, it says the committee encourages submission from Asian studies researchers globally and especially welcomes the opportunity to introduce the work of Asian scholars to an English readership. So it's looking for particularly for Asian scholars. In fact, when the people at the University of Tokyo started thinking about making this journal, they wanted to make it only for Asian voices. And the British publisher Cambridge was not happy about that. And so it accepts articles from all over the world. But certainly, if you're an Asian scholar who has not yet published much in the English language world and you have interesting things to say, they are going to be very interested in looking at it. So that's one idea, right? I put up here a few more basically of this one is a journal called Asian Anthropology. My theory is that maybe some of you are actually anthropologists. And this one is also editorially based in Asia. So Asian, if you look at the middle there, it says Asian Anthropology is editorially based in Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Japan, but welcomes people from all over East Asia, Southeast Asia, and South Asia. And while the language of the journal is English, we also seek original works translated into English, which will facilitate greater participation in scholarly exchange. And then you notice then it tells us, it seeks articles and research reports, and it tells us how long they should be, 5,000 to 10,000 words. It says they should have a theoretical argument that is of interest to anthropologists anywhere. Research reports can be focused fully on ethnography, but even if it's not based on ethnography, it should have some basis in ethnography, fieldwork. They want you to get out there and actually have been to or looking at the things from the place you're studying. Those were just two examples. Virtually, the homepage of virtually any journal is going to tell you something like that. This is who we are. Then you need to look through and read several back issues of the journal. So you need to see what their style is. What have they published? What do they say about editorial processes? How to decide if the journal is fit for your work, and look what the journal says about submission. So we're going to take a little look at that now. So this is one that I have actually never published in, but it has a very interesting kind of layout. If you go to its front page, its home page, you'll see the copy of the journal over here, East Asian Journal of Popular Culture. So we're presumably looking at all kinds of forms of popular culture, from cinema and music groups to probably internet games and all that sort of stuff. And you'll note that it tells you who its editors are. And there are, one is in Sheffield, one is at National Taiwan University, and one is at Kyushu University in Japan. And there's a kind of blurb there telling you what they look at. We look at film, media, literary, music, television, art and culture scholars, et cetera, et cetera. Across the top, you will see that it has, in fact, a series of buttons, and one of them is the kind of general description of the journal. The second one is submission guidelines. Then we have the editorial board, and then we have something about abstracting and indexing. So you can get a kind of idea of what this journal is doing and what you have to do to publish in it simply by looking at the homepage, and see if what you're doing fits with what they're looking for. Now, you may have to look at a bunch of journals to find this, to find the ones that seem the best fit. This is another one that I came across when I decided I wanted to find something I didn't normally look at. And this is one called the Annals of Tourism Research, which it turns out actually has a fairly high ranking, even though I must confess I had never heard of it. And it has down here, again, a guide for authors, and you can download their guide for authors. So it will tell you all kinds of things. And then they have a very, very detailed thing here. And if you clicked on these, they would take you to them. So before you begin, you need a declaration of interest. They say use inclusive language. And they have other things here on preparation, on peer review, and other things. We'll come back to this, but they have a very detailed guide here telling you what's going on. Clearly, you submit online, and they have a place, if you've already submitted, where you can track your paper. They also say you can order our journal if you want to subscribe, and there's a sample issue. So they give you the materials you need to figure out who they are, and then you can see whether who you are and what you're trying to do fits with who they are. One of the options that is mentioned there, and I thought it would be useful to say a little about, is open access publishing. Many of the journals published in Asia are in fact open access. As you probably know, there has been a kind of revolution in the publishing world in the last maybe 15 years, in which large organizations have put together packages of journals, digital journals, which they sell to organizations. And if you want to read those journals when you're a scholar, if you want to look up things, you have to hope that your organization has access to them. And access costs money, right? Or you can usually buy an individual article, but I don't know about you. I find paying $40 or $50 to see one article quite offensive, quite frankly. So open access is a way of publishing in which the author or the author's organization pays a fee, and that their article is then open to anyone to see. So it doesn't have to be, it isn't part. There are various versions of open access, full open access, and what is called hybrid open access. Some journals, and in fact, I would guess many of the journals in Indonesia published, for example, by academic organizations or published by departmental organizations, are in fact open access to start with. You put them out on the internet, and anybody who can find them can read them. But many of the major journals are not open access, but you can make your article open access. Um, Unfortunately, it costs money to do that. The standard fees seem to be somewhere between $2,000 and $3,000 US dollars. Now, often if you have a grant, your grant will pay that, but not always. This fee is called an article processing charge. There is another option to making your work available, which is virtually all contracts with publishers will allow you to place the next to the last version, not the printed version, but the one before that, in a university depository. So if your university has a kind of section of its library where they deposit digital copies of things, you can often put things there as long as it's not the final one that the journal has printed. And that's another way to make your material available. I happen to feel very strongly about this since I think the access to academic work should be as free as possible, and it shouldn't depend on how wealthy your organization is. But unfortunately, the world doesn't necessarily work that way, and so we have to find ways around it. Um, okay, so we're going to talk about submitting now, but there's a little few cautions here. The first one is it is not ethical to submit an article to more than one journal at a time. And the reason for that is that the journals are going to put a great deal of time and effort into considering whether to publish, and they will have to get advice from people about that. Much of the work is unpaid, and it's not fair to ask somebody to go through that and say, oh, well, some other journal accepted my article, so you don't have to bother. So it is not ethical. And if, in fact, two journals discover that you have submitted to both of them at the same time, you will likely get a little black mark by your name, and neither journal will accept the article. A second thing to consider when you do this, when you submit your article, you may be able to suggest potential reviewers, but you cannot suggest people who are closely connected to you. So you don't ask your supervisor. You can't say, hey, my supervisor should do this. You shouldn't ask close colleagues. You obviously shouldn't ask family members, even if they have a different surname than you do. You know, it's supposed to be open and above and word, so you don't do that. And you may also be allowed to suggest people you don't want to review your article. If, for example, if in the field you're working on, for example, there are very clear rivalries between either two schools of thought on an issue or two university factions and how they treat the issue, and you expect a hostility from the people on the other side, you might mention this, but you don't want to make a long list. I mean, it's hard enough for editors to find people to review without giving them a list of all the people in the field who you don't want to review it, leaving almost no one left for them to talk to. So now we'll go on to what happens when you, there's one more here. Before you submit, this is just a brief note. Maybe we can talk about it later if you're interested, on the difference between writing for people from your own country or your own field and writing for an international audience. And one of the things you need to think about when you do the last review of your article before you submit it to an international journal is to think for a little while, what your audience is likely to know and not to know about your subject. If I write an article in my field of Chinese history and I write it for other Chinese historians, we have a very large shared body of knowledge. And so there are all kinds of things I don't have to explain. But if I want to publish this in a journal of global history, where I hope to get people who are maybe interested in other parts of the world to also read it, then you have to put in sort of a little more information. Sometimes it's very straightforward, and sometimes all you need to do is put in a map and show where the places you're talking about are, not to assume that everybody knows what the transport between A and B is. You might show it on a map. Often you can put in very short explanations of background information a non-native may not know. If you're using indigenous terms, you want to be certain that you've put in a kind of translation the first time or explanation the first time you've used them. So the various kind of little things you do to make it easier for your readers to be able to make sense of what you're saying. So submission process and follow-up. We're going to assume now that you've decided which journal you're going to pick to try to submit your article to. And the first big rule is to follow the rules the journal sets out. So the journal will tell you its guidelines for submission. It may have a special type size it wants you to do. It very likely has a section that says what kind of citation system it wants you to use. It quite likely says how long the articles should be. And if they say we only take articles from 5 to 8,000 words, you don't submit a 12,000 word article. I mean, they're going to say no, right? And so you want to follow the guidelines. Many, not all, but many journals now use online submission systems. And if they do, you'll be asked to submit some or all of the following information. You have to have a title, the authors, the affiliations, the abstract, a cover letter, suggested or opposed reviewers in some cases. Then some of them now have conflicts of interest. Have you received money for this research from X company or X government or X whatever that might suggest you have a conflict of interest? Then you'll be asked to give them keywords. And at this stage, you may also inform the editor of any related manuscripts submitted or in press at other journals. And then you have to sit back and wait. If it's an automatic system, you will at least get an acknowledgement that the manuscript has been received. But you should not expect an answer yes or no for at least 1 to 3 months. And it may be considerably longer. In fact, it's bad news if you get an answer back right away. It usually, if you get an answer back right away, it usually means that you've gotten what we call a desk rejection. And the desk rejection is the sort of preview to the peer review process. When the article comes in, the people who are the editors, usually a journal has 1, maybe 2 or 3 editors, and then it will have an editorial board, and then it has a whole group of other people that it may call on to ask for opinions. When the article comes in, the editor or one of the editors is going to quickly look through it, and they're going to first look at the abstract, title and abstract, and then they're going to look at sort of the, a few of the technical details. How long is it? What the subject is, etc. If it comes back right away, it means that the editor has rejected it without going on, not bothering to get anybody else's opinion. Now that happens for several reasons. First reason it happens is you've simply guessed wrong at the journal, that you've submitted an article say, that is based on field work to a journal that only accepts theoretical arguments, theoretical papers. It's out, right? Or you've submitted an article on Indonesia to a Latin American studies journal. I mean, something like that. You've targeted your article at a journal and it's not within their scope. It's not in the scope of what they publish. And you'll get what is called a desk rejection that says, sorry, this is not out of scope for us. And now you have to go back and do the process again and look for another journal. But assuming that doesn't happen, what is going to happen is that the journal editor will look at the article, decide their interest, and then they will say, okay, now we're going to get what is called peer review. Peer review means basically your equals, other academics, other people with a specialty in your field are going to review this for the journal. Most journals use what is called double-blind peer review. Now, double-blind means that the person who is asked to review the article does not know who wrote it. And it also means that when you get the reviewer's report back, you don't know who wrote it. So it's double-blind. It doesn't always work. If in the body of the article, the author says, and this builds on my earlier work, and then you go and look at the references and you see 5 articles by the same person in the same kind of field, it's not hard to figure out who the author is. That is not the usual case, but it does sometimes happen. What the reviewer is asked to do is offer to the editor advice on the submitted manuscript. The editors make the final decision. And the goal of this is to basically reject weak articles and improve the good ones. Now, who is asked to do peer review? Maybe some of you have been asked, but if you're still fairly young and just getting started, that's probably not the case. It's usually people who've established some kind of publishing record in the field. Basically people, the important thing to know about this is that the peer reviewer gets paid nothing. It's voluntary work. I say that because obviously if it's voluntary work, it's hard to put pressure on people, right? You can't say, hey, I'm not going to pay you if you don't do this right away, because you're not paying them anyway. And so you have to depend on the goodwill of members of the academic community. There are people, I have friends who absolutely refuse to do any peer reviewing, and others who are considerably more generous with their time. With luck, you will hit a peer reviewer who is generous with their time and who really sets out to try to help by offering constructive criticism. They may not take your article, but with any luck, you will get constructive criticism. When the editor asks the reviewer to do it, usually they will ask them to do it, as soon as possible. So this is in fact a quote from a letter I got, an email I got asking to do peer review on something. I've taken out the name of the journal, but the rest of it is a direct quote. So I'm asking if you can evaluate the attached article for XX journal. And then it's got the kind of standard sort of overall evaluations you can come up with: accept as is, minor revisions, certain required revisions, reject for now, but encourage the author to rewrite and resubmit, and out rejection. The first one does sometimes happen, the accept as is, but you shouldn't expect that to come. Um, you, I think probably the most common overall judgment is revise and resubmit. And getting a revise and resubmit is very good. And then it goes on to say our usual practice is to pass on the identity of the referee if the assessment falls into categories 1 and 2, but to withhold the identity of the referee if the assessment falls into the categories 3 to 5. But the reviewer can remain anonymous if they want to. And then it says at the end, please do this if you can within 30 days. Sometimes people actually do it within 30 days, but a lot of times it takes longer, and the editor has to kind of gently remind, or the editor's secretary or administrative assistant gently reminds the reviewers that they're working on a review. As an author, especially a young author, the whole process is quite scary. You don't know who is going to review your article, and negative comments can be very hard to deal with. There are things you can do to make the process less scary. And the first one, which I would urge you to do, is before you submit the article, ask one or more colleagues or friends or members of a writing group you belong to read a draft and give you questions. I mean, you don't have to keep it all just in your own place. I know it's often hard when you first sort of expose your work to other people, but I personally never submit an article anywhere without asking at least one friend to look at it and poke holes, say what doesn't work. Part of the reason you need to do this is we all get so involved in our own work that we lose sight of the definitions, the questions, the connections that we think are so clear, but when it's down there on the paper are not clear to somebody else. And the easiest way to find those is to get somebody else to read it for you. And they can say, right here, it's not clear. How do these things connect? Or what are you trying to say here? And so getting other people to read it. Some people, many young scholars, try to get work in writing groups where you work with your friends and you read each other's work and critique it. All of that will make it easier to send it off. You'll feel a little more confident when you send it off. But you still, you have to send it off eventually. This is then when it goes off, these are the kinds of things that an editor asks a reviewer to consider. And I put them up here because I think if you keep this as a kind of list, you can ask yourself some of these questions before you submit the article. So is the topic important? So you should have told people in the article or why you think it's important. And is it going to be working? Who is it going to be of interest to? Those very specialized or general? What contribution does it make? What is the specific contribution of your article? That should be there in the introduction or conclusion somewhere. What is your argument or thesis? And is it clear? Are the sources appropriate? Is the writing clear? Did you detect serious factual errors or internal inconsistencies? And then what is your overall evaluation? If you're lucky, a reviewer is also going to, when they send the manuscript back to the editor, is going to put in various specific questions and comments on parts of the argument, which you will get. These are other questions that have to do with methods. In the natural sciences, they worry a lot about replicability. Is this a one-off chance that you got these results, or in fact, can you get the same results if you do it again? with qualitative methods, you need to be very careful. Um, I also I use documentary sources, but I also do a lot of field work and oral history. And it's always good to have some kind of records of that, either very detailed field notes, or if you have data sets, et cetera, that are somewhere, if somebody should ask questions, that you can point to these things as data. So it's not just, well, I thought this. So how long do you have to wait? Depends on the journal. Editors try to get answers back in several months, but since they're depending on the goodwill of their reviewers, and no, but most journals use at least 2 reviewers for every article. So it's not just one person who has to answer back, it's 2 people. How long do you have to wait before you can sort of write to the editor and say, hey, I'm still waiting? If it's an online submission system, it probably has a place where you can track the article and see what's happening. If it doesn't, you can write to the editor and ask, but probably you should wait for at least 3 months. I mean, hassling the editor is not going to put them in a good mood. And so, and they're not the ones who are holding up the process. So what happens when you get, say, revise and resubmit? We're going to go with revise and resubmit as the most common. The first thing you have to do is read the comments and then spend at least 2 or 3 days cooling off. All of us, somebody writes like that. If somebody sends critical comments and you get sort of like this, and then you need to sort of relax so you can say, okay, yeah, those are good points, and I'll try to do something about it. Then you need to decide which of the things that have been said you can accept and what to do. If there's some that you think you cannot deal with, then you need to say why. If, in fact, the suggestions are some that you think are going to radically change what you want to say and you don't want to do it, then you should probably withdraw the article and look for a different journal. Whatever you decide to do after you've gotten the comments, you should inform the editor what you're doing, and let them know, I plan to make the revisions. I would expect that it's going to take me so much time. In some cases, you may have to go out and do a little more research, but you need to tell them what you're doing. In some cases, you may receive a rejection. With luck, you may also get the reviewer's comments. And you should certainly then take those into account when you think about targeting another journal and use them as positive commentary for your own revisions. In fact, this process of revising sometimes goes back and forth several times. You may revise the article, the editor will send it out for a second round of review if the revisions are substantial. And you may have a series of exchanges with the editor and their editorial assistants before publication. How long does it take to publish? It depends on the journals and what kind of backlog they have, how often they publish. There often is information of some sort on the front page of the journal's homepage, but it can take significant time. You should not expect it to happen probably more than you should expect it to be at least a year from the time you submit until the article will be published. If you are in a terrible rush for job reasons or something, you need to take that into consideration when you select the journal. And good luck. So I'm going to stop right there, and I think I will turn it now over to my colleague to, I have to stop sharing the screen, right? Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Linda Grove. So we've just listen to some sort of insider's perspective from reviewers, editors, as well as an authors herself. And I think we've been having a lot of insights into publication process. Now I'm going to have a little bit of wrap up of what Dr. Linda Grove has shared, and I'm going to give a little bit of notes. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to start, and I think everyone can see my screen now. So we've been listening to a lot of things. We've had a little bit of adventure to different journals that Dr. Linda Grove has taken us. And there are thousands, I think, maybe thousands is too much, but there are lots of journals that I haven't heard of. And once you're looking at the list of journal, it's like going down to the rabbit hole because you will see different journals that you haven't heard before. And then voila, they're there actually. And there are different kinds of knowledge development, I think, that people want to share and they want to build that particular kind of field or knowledge in that sense. So they build journals. And the other thing is that I think this is important as a young academics, or we just began to write, we are wondering what is the other side looks like. What's the reviewing process in particular? What is the editor and reviewer's role? Because once we submit an article, we just thinking of waiting, and this kind of waiting game can be very daunting, especially because we don't know the result. Yeah. So I'm just going to share a little bit of notes of highlighting what previous presentation as this has been discussed, and I'm going to add a little bit more, especially sharing from my side. Yeah. So I think the big picture, what we can think about is that we've got one article that we think is ready. So assuming you already have one article written with your colleague, or you've been, shared that with your colleagues and have their perspectives and infused with their comments, so it's ready to be submitted. So we can think about how what things to consider before submission. Then we can also think about the waiting time. Then what we will do once we receive the news from the journal. So before submission, we could think about two things. I think my colleague has shared about online and email submission. So if it's an online submission, there are things that you need to prepare. You've got your article, but you also need to prepare a cover letter. So it's sort of letter that you need to write, talking about your paper in brief and why it is appropriate to be published in that article, basically addressing the editor. Then when you want to submit it, because it's online, so one of the example is Scholar One, think about the guidelines or the kind of format that they expect. Usually, when you're using Scholar One, for example, or online submission, you need to prepare different files to upload. There will be main manuscript that will be anonymous, or which means that you need to remove your name, or when you're publishing something and you cite it in your own work, you need to remove that as well. So you need to ensure anonymity for blind reviewing. Then usually you need to separate table and figure in different files and some other things. Also think about reference style, because each journal has different styles. Some, I think in my field, linguistics, we usually adopt APA 7th edition, but I know there are other referencing styles in different journals, and that's something you need to consider when you're formatting your article. Also, usually in that online system, there are some forms or questions you need to fill out about your short bio, for example, the abstract that you need to copy paste in that area, and then another form to upload. Because if your work usually related with human participants or subjects, sometimes you need to upload the ethics forms, proving that your research is done in an ethical way. So look at the systems, look at the kind of questions or forms that you need to fill out. I think that would be it will be very important to prepare, not just preparing your article. But if it is email submission, usually you need some sort of cover letter too. Usually you just put it in the email and stating who you are, which edition that you are, edition of the art or of the journal that you are targeting, as well as the other thing that you think your article is appropriate for the journal publication. Think about the guidelines as well. Look at the formatting, word count, reference style. and some other files to submit. They usually journals who require email submission. They have clear guidelines what to do for authors to submit their works there. And I think it's important for you to put everything in that email. Make sure you just don't leave it in the attachment. Yeah, I think it's just for practical reason. Now, assuming you are submitting and now you're after some time of waiting 3 months at least, yeah, I experienced some longer time, and I think you just get used to that waiting game, and that's okay. So no news is good news, because usually if it's quick, it could be rejected. I also experienced desk rejection. The main problem would be because I did not pay attention to the theme, and you got the news basically. Well, big things is either your manuscript is rejected or accepted. So it's not you that is being rejected, but it's the manuscript. So I think one of my supervisors told me this, I think this saying, say that when you got rejected, don't associate that to your personal brand. So it's just something to do with your manuscript. Don't take it personally. So I think we could consider that. If it's rejected and if you've got comment from the reviewers, I think that's kind of good, because you could see why it is rejected. And usually, if it's accepted, I think I would categorize that into 3. It would be conditionally, which means that you need to incorporate comments and address the comments from the reviewers, and usually you will need to resubmit and you will be reassessed. Or it could be major revision. It's still good news. I think there's a chance of being accepted. There will be round of revision, and then sometimes it's minor revision, or I haven't experienced that. I haven't experienced submitting an article, a manuscript, and then accepted as is. I think it will be a miracle, but I think having minor revision is good. Is good enough, and even getting major revision is good, because I appreciate the reviewers' comment who took time to work on the article. Yeah. So when you're accepting to publish, that means you've got the good news. I think I would suggest you to read the reviewer's comment. So check the wordings carefully in that part of that article. I mean, usually there are 2 ways I think reviewers addressing comments. They usually put them directly on the article or on the manuscript, or sometimes it is in a different file. So in either way, you have to read the wordings carefully. They usually addressing in particular part of that paper, and usually try to find some sort of bigger picture until it's the local issues there. So it's very, I think reviewers are really nice, and they took the time to carefully read your article. So I think it's good that you could check the wordings. And the other important thing is that you also need to check any date, because sometimes we just too focus on the comments and we forgot to put any dates. Editors work on dates, and so we need to check on the deadlines. We don't want to work on our revision and then we submit, it's too late. Yeah. So you need to be careful on that as well. So when you work on the revision, try to address all comments or change, but there's sometimes you also need to prepare for another letter. So in that letter, you need to address what you have changed, which comments you have addressed, and if you don't want to address that particular comments, you also need to justify that. So I think that's important for that. And the final bits is that I think this is the exciting part, at least in my experience. So you just do a round of editing and proofreading. So we look at the content, and then in the final bit is usually to check on the language, some sort of typo, and if the references you cited match with in the body of the manuscript. So I think that would be read the reviewer's comment, work on the revision, and work on the final bits as well. Yeah. So now I think it's time for us to have discussion, and I'm sure there have been many questions, and I think it's good for us to ask because we've got the expert in the field, the top professor here. Okay, so I'm going to stop share, and I think we can start with question. So we've got first question. I think we can start, yeah, Ibu Linda. Yeah. Okay, maybe we can start. Yeah, we can just keep going if we just keep talking. Now let's just start the interactive section. So we've got first question from Mr. Mario Pascal. Thank you so much for the explanation, Dr. Linda. I would like to ask a question about how to start research or join an academic conversation based on our agreement to their research. Yeah, so like,
So if you've read something and you think it's wonderful, right? And so just writing a fan letter is not going to do it, right?
yeah,
uh, so I think what you need to do then is think about what you're studying and how it fits with what the person whose research you've read said and how you want to use it. So it may be that, it's given you new ideas for how you can explore some issue, or you can take the ideas or the definitions and use them for something like that. I mean, it's hard to say in general terms because it's going to depend very much on what you've seen. Let me see if I can think of um, something. I mean, my examples are going to all come from my own field, which is maybe not so hot, but um, I read an article that somebody has written about doing recent research in Chinese villages about efforts to get rid of falling down houses. China has been urbanizing very rapidly, and people have left the countryside, but they have family homes in villages that they don't want to give up the land, or the land where the home is. And so the homes are sort of falling apart, and the village wants the land back, but they can't take it legally or something like that. And I read that, for example, and then I thought, I mean, this is a problem in Japan now. They're doing surveys all the time about, people who have families that don't want to put up the money to tear down an old house, so they just let it sit there and fall apart, and it destroys the neighborhood, right? And so one way to do that would just to sort of take it from that kind of say, you have you've written about something that touches on some of the things that I'm interested in, and I'm going to do research on that. Um, Sometimes for historians, it may be historically. So you say, oh, that's really interesting. I wonder if I can link that to something either that happened before or that happened afterwards. Um, I don't know. Harney, do you have examples from linguistics about how you do it?
well, it could be, yeah. I think from one field to another would be different. If it's from nature or hard sciences, you need to join a lab
Yeah.
in order to enter academic conversation. But I think in linguistics or in my field, actually, we could just read a couple of papers and we've shared similar interests, and then we could contact the researcher or the corresponding author and look, I have been doing this and you've been doing that. If you agree, we could, perhaps meet through Zoom or in person because I want to discuss this research project. So it could be as direct as possible, depending on the researcher, because when we're doing linguistic, we're dealing with text really, or something that is printed or in social media. So it's easier to access for both, and it's easier in a way that to enter that academic conversation. But it truly depends on the field, really. But yeah, but that's my share from the linguistics perspective. It's possible you could just contact the researchers or on the paper that you've been reading. If you and if they're, I think they would be happy to at least share their ideas. And if you could do a joint paper or joint research together, if it's manageable. So that's my share, Linda.
I think also that it's a lot easier now in a funny sort of way than it was before COVID.
Yeah.
Everybody's gotten used to using Zoom, and people are feeling isolated and very much want to contact with other people.
Yes.
If you look at citation indexes,
Yeah.
unless you're some really big academic star, you will discover that most of our articles are maybe cited 5 times, 10 times. I mean, if somebody writes to you and says, hey, I read your article and I was really excited about it, it's going to make anybody feel good, and they're going to be happy, almost always going to be very happy to talk to you.
Yes.
It's not that often that people, in fact, take the time to write to people and say, hey, I read what you wrote and I'm really interested and maybe we can talk.
Yeah.
Our organization, Social Science Research Council, is busy now trying to set up programs that will produce international collaborations between junior scholars in Asia and the US.
Mm.
And it is deliberately trying to encourage that because we think that, in fact, those kind of international collaborations are very important. And I think a lot of other groups are doing the same thing. And as I said, I think the fact that there are now so many international conferences and other things on Zoom means that it's easier, in fact, in a sort of way to people are more used to it.
Mm.
And so take the risk and write to somebody and say, hey, I want to talk to you.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm using ResearchGate. I think there are many people who are asking not just about paper, but things that they want to ask me, and I think I'm very happy to actually respond. So yeah, that's a really good suggestion. Take a risk and contact them directly. Yeah. So I think that would answer what Mario has asked. We can
Okay.
move on to the next question. Yeah. So this question is about language, I think. Language used for the academic from Mr. Sandy. My papers were mostly rejected because of language issues. Is it possible to write to editor not to give desk rejection if the language is the problem?
I don't think so. I mean, I think the solution is, in fact, if you can afford it, to pay somebody to edit it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry. I wish I could say yes, you can, but I think I can't imagine any editor saying. I do know as a reviewer, I
Yeah.
often review things that are written by people who are not native speakers of English. And if it doesn't have to be perfect English, I mean, but it needs to be reasonably good. I think if the content is interesting, I assume that many other reviewers share my views and say, yeah, you're going to have to do some English editing on this, but it's important enough to do it. But it has to be good enough so that you can get the ideas of what the person is trying to do, and so that the editors can see how much English editing needs to be done.
Yeah. That's right. Well, I understand that issue in one sense, but I also want my paper to be as readable as possible, reaching the national audience. So I think it's fair. I think every time I try to submit in English, I would ask a language editor or anyone who has this competence of English academic writing. So at least it would pass a English issue. And I think the issue is it's not something to do with if your paper is good enough or not. I think it's to do with readability. We want our content to be conveyed and to be understood. And I think that's the thing that you need to consider. Yeah. So I hope it does not discourage you, Mr. Sandy. It's okay if you got, that. So, but then you know the issue and you can ask or hire a language editor to read on your paper.
I mean, and another possibility, if you have collaborators who are or friends who are native speakers of English, is to trade off. I do that often with friends because I publish in English, but also in Chinese and Japanese. And while I read and speak both languages, I do not write them well enough for publication. And so I trade off with friends. I will help them with their work, getting it into English, and they in turn help me with my work, getting it into either Chinese or Japanese. And that is another way to try to do it, especially to keep the costs down, and to basically help them, they help you, and you both end up with publications.
Yeah. And I think it's nice to actually have this kind of exchange with your collaborator because you know the field, you know the content of the paper, and you know what kind of language style that you need. So I think that would be a good idea too. So that would be a good consideration for Mr. Sandy, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's another reason to try to find collaborators of roughly your own age. They don't have to be, but we're,
Yeah,
we're talking about trying to create equal relations with collaborators in other countries.
that's right. Yeah. Well, that's what I did too. I had to write an abstract in Spanish. I did not know Spanish, Spanish and French ones, just the abstract. So I asked my friend who are familiar with my work to help review and edit the abstract. So it's just not English. I think it applies to any other languages.
Yes.
When I supervise my students who wrote in Indonesian, I would ask them to have a review from a language editor so that it would be, it would be readable for other readers, especially. Yeah. So it's not just about language issue, it's about academic writing. So make sure it's accessible for readers, potential readers, especially. Yeah. Now we've got another questions from Miss Malinda. So is it okay to recommend reviewers from our own country to handle the language issues? The way Indonesian write English should be different from the native. I think that's the question.
I mean, this I will say a little bit, and then Hani, who is a much more an expert in discourse analysis than I am, may want to say things. The whole point of publishing is to get people's interest and to get them to read what you're doing.
Mhm.
And I think that means that you have to try to follow the discourse kind of rules or expectations of the language you're trying to publish in. I run into this all the time. In addition to writing myself, I also do some translation, and I've published translations from both Chinese and Japanese into English. And particularly in Japanese, basically you have to turn the article upside down
Mm.
because the Japanese discourse style puts out all the data and tells you what it's all about at the end. Now, that's not, I mean, sure, you could put that into English just directly that way and send it to a journal. The editor's going to say nobody's patient enough. I think English readers must be particularly impatient, and, and so they're not going to wait to get to they expect you to tell them up front why this is important, where it's going. And I think you have to follow those styles. Now, to get back to your question, can you ask somebody for your own handle the language issues? I think it's not really the language issues. I mean, it's a discourse style, and I think you do need to meet the expectations of the discourse style and the language you're publishing in.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think every journal has their aims and scope and objective, and I think they put that for some reason. Yeah, and I think that entails the kind of formatting that they would expect. I understand in the sense that when I begin my career as an academic, I'm still junior academic at the moment, but I also did reviewing for several journals. We think that when we write, it's done, but writing is not like something that you could finish instantly. Even though you're a good writer, but there are some other perspectives from the reviewers that would fit into that journal that would require you to change that kind of writing. So there are different dimensions, I think, if I could say it, that your draft or your article should fit in that expectation. And it's not that it's nothing to do with the content. It's that something that the kind of style that would be expected from the journal. So I think it's a bit hard to understand. But once you enter the conversation, once you're familiar, you would understand why it is done that way. It's not something really prescriptive, but it's something that you need to follow. Yeah, and in a way, you are introducing a new work. Your work in Indonesia, for example, and you want other people to understand. And the way to be understood is to follow the convention so that your ideas can be accessible for others through that kind of format. Yeah, so it's actually for your own good as well. You could review from your own country, but be open to to get a review from people from other countries. Because imagine your article, if it's written in English, that means that all academic who's interested in your field who could read English would be able to read yours. So that means that's a sort of convention, kind of cultural, I put in a quote unquote, so that they would see that, okay, so this is the conversation you're taking. I think, yeah, that's a bit of abstract, but I hope Miss Malinda could, see our point. And yeah. Yeah. And we've got another question from Mr. Shahid. Currently, I don't have any exact affiliations because I don't work as a permanent lecturer as I used to. Hopefully I will. Yeah, we hope so. Would there be any opportunity for me to publish my article without mentioning affiliation? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at an article the other day in a recently published journal, and somebody is listed as an independent scholar.
Mm.
And so, yes, I think certainly you can. I hadn't ever thought of that as being particularly a block. I'm not sure that editors would certainly not turn something down just because you had no affiliation.
Mhm.
Although I mean, I know what you mean. At the top of any kind of article, there's always a little asterisk or something beside somebody's name, and at the bottom it says where they're affiliated. But it shouldn't block publication, I don't think.
Yeah, I think I saw several name affiliating themselves as independent researcher.
Yeah.
Or if affiliation is actually necessary, you can ask the place where you temporarily work to use that as an as affiliation. But because of the long process of publication, maybe you entered as an independent researcher, but then you got a job, a permanent one, then you can use that affiliation at the end. And think about 1 year. That happened to me actually because I moved place. I usually when I work in Hong Kong, I we submitted a paper when I work in Hong Kong, but then I moved to Indonesia to Universitas Indonesia, but then I had to change my affiliation. So that could happen to you too. You can start as an independent researcher, which is in a way it's not an issue, I think. And then once you got work permanently, then you can use that affiliation. Yeah. So it's a quite a dynamic one, but still submit an article even though you don't have any affiliation. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's some reason too, Ibu Linda, that there are some friends of mine who work as a associated to particular institution without getting paid actually, so that they could use that affiliation to submit an article.
I mean, many organizations, for example, in both the US and Japan, I think will take people on as affiliated researchers. They don't pay them anything,
Yeah.
but you can you can list that as a kind of thing. I mean, in Japan, I was very surprised when I first came to Japan. It was particularly hard for women to find permanent jobs. And most of the women, I mean, the number of women academics who had jobs at universities was small, but the number of women who had been through graduate school and who were independent scholars who were doing other work was quite a lot, and they were publishing. And there were also many who were, for example, high school teachers who were also engaged in academic publishing. But that may be a local custom, but I certainly wouldn't let that stand in my way of trying to publish, trying to do research and publish.
Yeah. So I hope that answer your question, Mr. Shahid. You could submit an article even though you're an independent researcher. It shouldn't be an issue too here in Indonesia, I think. Yeah, I can move on to another question. In my campus, it has a program to make affirmation in international publication in the US. Would I have a letter of acceptance from your campus so that I can visit and under your supervision to publish international publication? Not too sure. Where's this? Yeah.
I'm not sure what the question means. I think.
So you need an affirmation in international publication in the US. Maybe Miss Erna, you could elaborate on that question, perhaps. What is it to do with international publication particularly from the US and a letter of acceptance because I think it's quite a long process, yeah, to get a letter of acceptance from a journal. Uh, I'm not too sure either about that question. But I think reviewing and editing process is blind review, so you would not know who review your article. I think that's the principle. And if you're asking to supervise publication, okay. So can I speak, Miss Erna here? Yeah, you could speak directly if you wish, Miss Erna. Could invite them. Come at America. Could we invite Miss Erna to speak here? Not too sure about the system. Yeah,
I'm not either.
still mute from the operator. So I think I'm going to ask Miss Anindya here. Okay. Is it allowed to have a live question from our audience? Maybe it's actually not possible. So maybe it's a bit monologue interactive kind of way. Or if you're interested in Dr. Linda Grove's work, I think you could Google Dr. Linda Grove's email and have an exchange about her work.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, okay. Miss Arna
Ernie?
here. Yep.
Yeah. It's my speak clear.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. I could hear
Yeah.
you.
Okay, without any video, yeah.
Okay. Oh,
Okay. Like this one, yeah, Miss Linda Groove, my campus or religious affairs sometimes asks to the lecturer to visit the campus of USA, but the prerequisite is he or she should have acceptance, letter of acceptance. Jadi letter of acceptance that I or the students have supervision like apa acceptance from the lecturer in the campus of USA, and then under the he or she supervision, they can make apa itu supervision about it, and then for about 3 months in USA, and then we can publish international journal like this one. So the problem is we can we have difficulties, yeah, we have difficulties to have a supervisor or letter of acceptance from the USA campus like this one, Miss.
right.
I mean, I'm not in the United States now. And so there's no way I personally can help with this problem. I live in Japan, and the university where I taught for almost 40 years was in Japan. And so it won't do you any good.
Yeah, in Japan,
think,
yeah.
Yeah.
In Japan. But if I ask you, I ask you to be my supervision, is it okay, Miss Linda?
I mean, I'm not on. I'm retired from the university now, and so I can't accept to supervise people not in that official way. I mean, I do it informally for people in my own field, but I can't do it in anything that would give you the papers to allow you to.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay. It's okay. Thank you.
Thank
Mrs.
you.
Linda, thank you for your kindly explanation. Okay, thank you, Miss
Okay.
Abby.
Yeah. Thank you, Miss Erna. All right. So I think that clears up what the question is about. Well, it is hard really to start the collaboration. I think it's to do with the kind of international collaborative networks that have been. it's been a big and timely issue at the moment. And of course, university across Indonesia and I think other parts of the world as well want to build international collaborative works in many fields. But yeah, make sure that's the kind of field that that is matched, not crossing the field or something like that. We've got one final question, I think, before we close it. So it's from Mr. Theodorus Sulon Suban. Ibu Linda, my main interest is English language teaching. May you suggest me any journals to publish my articles related to ELT? Well,
I think you may be better able to answer this than I can, since
yeah, it's
I'm,
kind of different field from you.
yes, it's quite different from my own field.
Well, there are plenty of ELT teaching journal. If I could, answer your question, Theodorus. Are either what we can think about is what Dr. Linda Grove has classified. Are you interested in sharing ELT locally? So in the Indonesian journal, there's a lot of Indonesian journals which are good, and even they reach to first or second Scopus Index. So you could look for that for Indonesian Journal of Applied Linguistics, for example, and some other journals from other university. So there are plenty. But if you're looking for more international audience, of course there are plenty too. There's this called ELT Journal published by Oxford University Press. And if you want to be more theoretical, there's TESOL Quarterly. So you could look on that. So there are plenty actually that you could publish. So it depends on the kind of article you are writing. You are writing at the moment. Do you want to? What's the scope? You want to publish in a regional area? Is it something to do with English in Asian, English language teaching in Asian? You can think about Asian Englishes, for example. Or if you want to do it more international, you could think about ELT Journal or TESOL Quarterly because it's wider audience. So think about that. And I think I've mentioned several journals that might be related and relevant to you. And you could also Google in Simago to think if you aim for top tier journal or high index ranking journal, you can just Google ELT, type ELT, and then it will appear a lot of journal. Then you can study which journal you want to publish. That's quite a lot actually for ELT. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you for the classification that you've made, either it's for international scope, regional one, local one. I think that's important to have that perspective when we want to write a journal. Yeah. All right. So do we have any other question? I think that would be all. And I think we're just about time. So Ibu Linda, I think we're expecting you to have some sort of closing remarks.
Well, I sorry I didn't see all of your faces, but it's been very nice to have a chance to talk with you. And I hope if you have further questions, please feel free to send an email and I will be happy to try to answer them. And good luck with writing. It's hard when you first start out and you're young, but you've got lots of energy and I'm sure you all have many, many interesting things to say.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you, Dr. Linda Grove. It's been a nice experience to facilitate your session.
Thank you.
Thinking of starting reading your work. I like reading. Interesting to reading this, economic history or something to do. So
I also do gender studies.
Oh, that would be interesting. Yeah. Thank you for everyone here. It's been a lovely and interactive session, and I think it's quite productive one. Good luck for your effort to for all of your endeavor to publish, and I'm wishing you all the best for that. And I'm going to return this session to Miss Aninda. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Belinda Grove, and also Dr. Harney for the insightful discussion. Early in this event, we had a question of the day. The question was, the following are all components of a research paper except, and the answer is D, twist. Shout out to @Yudanto from Instagram for answering correctly. Thank you to everyone who has participated to our question of the day. Don't forget to tune in next time and catch a chance to get a live shout from us. Now you may be wondering what are upcoming events that will be happening in Ad America. Please visit our website at www.adamerica.or.id to subscribe to our newsletter and get our weekly event updates. You can also find us on our social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at AT America. You can get fun content, giveaways, and so much more. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel to get updates with our latest events. So, thank you so much for joining us. My name is Aninda, and see you next time. Bye bye.